So this morning I'll be reading from Kamma and the End of Kamma by Ajahn Sucitto. I'll begin a little ways into chapter 1 on page 9, Kamma and the sense of self. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Bodang dhammang sanghang namasami. In its fullest sense, liberation from kamma is liberation from cause and effect in the mind. It's a process of mentally, emotionally stepping back from any state and seeing it just as a state without reactions and attitudes. This simple skill, which most of us can do from time to time, is what we develop in Buddhist practice. More radically, it means stepping out of the program that asserts that my life gets fulfilled by having or being some state or another, in this world or another. This is the view that perpetuates kamma. When this view is the lens, I keep looking for or imagining some unchangeable, subjective state that I could be, have, or in fact already am. Have you ever found one? This self-view attaches to bodies, feelings, notions, mental programs, and sense data as this is me, this is mine, this is myself. But have you ever found one that you can have forever and that never lets you down? And who is the self that could have something, and what could he or she be? How can I own a feeling when the pleasant ones go when I don't want them to, and the disagreeable ones roll in uninvited? How can I be my impulses, ideas, or moods when they arise, condition each other, and pass away like a tag team? You can't call the feelings a permanent self because they come and go and they change. You can't even call the propensity to feel a self because that too is subject to whether we're awake or asleep, numbed, inattentive, or hypersensitive. Moreover, the personal meanings that we project onto life and the reactions and psychological responses that are our thumbprints are also subject to change. The dynamic of this process is so continual that it gives rise to the sense of solidity, but a core permanent essence or entity can't be found. If you consider the topic further, anything that is self would have to be independent, just self, and not part of anything else. But the existence and constitution of body, for example, is dependent on parents and food and many other things. It doesn't arise independently. When you cut your hair or nails, you don't lose your sense of self, so self cannot be associated with embodiment. And aren't feelings and the propensity to feel dependent on something other? We see something. We feel something. What kind of seeing or feeling could occur without an object? Furthermore, the self cannot be associated with mind states and activities. Don't they arise dependent on physical states or other mind states or activities? Then again, if body, feelings, and sense data were myself, surely I could say, let them be like this and not like that. But actually, they go their own way, the way of cause and effect. So what is self and what is going on? We may not be able to find anything that we can call a self, yet we continually have the experience of being something, a continual feeling of I am. How is that? It's because of consciousness, whose normal function is to discriminate experience in terms of a separate subject and object. The subject and object are inferences rather than realities, and they depend on each other. You can't have a sense of a subject without some object, and vice versa. Now, when mental consciousness attends to our inner subjective dimension, it again separates subject from object, with an inference of I as the propagator and me, the inheritor of mind states, moods, thoughts, and the rest. As in, here I am feeling confused by myself because that action is unlike me and I'm not feeling quite like myself right now. Every sensation, every thought, every feeling that passes through is either tagged as what I am, this is mine, even though they pass and change, or else the notion is held that I am other than this, even though I am defined in terms of input that affects me. Either of these two instinctive psychological activities of selfing, I am this or I am other than this, continually determines a sense of self in ways that generate more specific self-definition. However, because I can't hold on to what I want and can't get away from what I don't want, the underlying mood of self is restlessness and unfulfilled. I keep trying to find the good state, but this one isn't quite it. Thus, there is dis-ease. Liberation from this dis-ease and stress is thus synonymous with awakening out of the dissatisfied self. Developing yourself to freedom from self. The strong inclination to sustain a self, called becoming or being, stores that sense of I and me as a notion, a self-impression that lasts as a reference point for whatever my mind has been involved with. This self is thus not an entity but a pattern, a self-construction program made up of emotional and psychological behaviors. These give rise to the sense that this is how I operate, these are my opinions, this is my history, and accordingly, there is the impression of being a self in such and such a state, with strategies of how to continue to be in it, augment it, or get out of it. But all that is not an identity, not a fixed thing, but a process of being this and becoming that. Becoming is the core program behind Kamma. It's the reason why there is so much activity in the mind. But because it's an activity, it can stop. However, becoming is deep-rooted and instinctive. It doesn't stop through reasoning. As an instinct, it has to be arrested in the depth of the heart, and that is a process which involves steering the push of intention towards clearing the selfing view. First, we need to develop strength, skill, capacity. So much of the Buddha's teaching favors becoming in terms of becoming clearer, steadier, more warm-hearted. We generate good Kamma through acts of generosity, kindness, and through letting go of behavior that does harm. We become calmer, brighter people. Right view encourages awareness of the results of what we do, awareness of sharing this world with others, and awareness of the importance of our inner psychological realm over that of sense contact. If the deeper sense of fulfillment through compassion and calm gets established, then we can let go of getting and gaining and holding on, major causes of stress. We can shift out of the drive towards short-term efficiency, convenience, success, comfort, and sex appeal. Then we're on the right track for liberation. Consider the social scenario. In the West, many of us can live in physical comfort, yet because we are continually being presented with more refined commodities or changing standards by which to measure ourselves, there's not much contentment, and there are social and group pressures. A person might very well feel that if they're not wearing the right clothes, their job is at risk, so they have to bear this in mind. People can become depressed, even neurotic, if their bodies don't match up to the current standards of beauty, or if their personality is not smart enough, cynical enough, seedy enough, or whatever the fashion is. We want to avoid losing out on good opportunities, and we fear the loneliness of not having any friends. So there can be a nervous feeling of inadequacy and insecurity that deprives us of a sense of trust in our innate worth as a human being. So because of just this, it's important that we sense and define ourselves as being a part of those currents, if only to get onto some firmer ground. And what really helps is to be able to calm and collect the mind and to develop oneself in what one gives, and to develop oneself in what gives greater benefit, to live one's own life with authenticity. We can cultivate simplicity of needs and a sense of truthfulness and integrity. We can gain contentment through acknowledging the good in ourselves and others. People have problems and flaws, but to recognize and honor the goodness that we all have is skillful. It's also wise to regard our tendencies towards reactivity and confusion with compassion. This is because how you attend creates the dwelling place of your mind. So if we can begin to experience clarity and empathy for ourselves and others, we find ourselves living in a more appreciative and balanced way that encourages goodness to develop. In this way, we incline towards good karma, and a basis develops that really supports our well-being. Working with the mind's impressions in this way can bring about radical changes in life. We discover that the feeling good factor required by our sense of self is most fully acquired through inclining towards ethically based, compassionate behavior. The qualities that arise from these inclinations are immensely nourishing. This is cultivating self in a right way, and it is an essential aspect of Dhamma practice. From this, we realize that we can make meaningful choices in our lives. This enables us to sense the potential in being human and encourages us to investigate it further. Insight and not self. All this good karma is based on mind cultivation, and the skill of calming and stilling the mind through meditation is another form of good or bright mental karma. Broadly speaking, there are two main meditation themes for stabilizing the mind, that of firming up attention and that of bringing well-being into the heart. These focus on good, gladdening effects to both bring immediate well-being to the mind and to switch off the really destructive programs of resentment, depression, anxiety, and the rest. So we become a good self with a mind that is calm and open. That makes it possible to investigate how self happens and how becoming can be relinquished altogether. This is the cultivation of insight. These two aspects of mental cultivation, developing a good self and becoming liberated from the self-notion, go together. When we can develop a good self, we can investigate the basis of that and realize that it is based upon states which are dependent on good programs, such as kindness, resolve, or concentration. They're not inherently yours or anyone's. This is the view of insight. Causes and conditions give rise to fortunate and unfortunate effects. Moreover, the fortunate ones arise more readily and consistently if the mind isn't preoccupied with affirming or denying a self who has or doesn't have them. That view of self as success or as failure adds a bias that the mind gets stuck in. And when it's stuck, it feels stressful, and so lays down the conditions for restlessness, uncertainty, craving, despondency, and so on. But self-view has to be handled, to be penetrated and revealed as a series of stress-producing programs. Trying to get rid of a self involves intention, and even an attitude of indifference generates effects. Any nihilistic approach carries the seeds of dark kamma. Wanting not to be anything still operates from the premise that one is something in the first place, and it entails the intention to annihilate. All that makes us less confident and warm-hearted in our actions and relationships. Instead, the process of awakening has to shift to the emphasis from that of self-construction to one of supporting and appreciating balance in the mind. We need to feel that inner stability in the present to be able to let go of the assumptions and biases of the past and the becoming drive that strives for or is anxious about the future. And it is through that letting go of becoming that a still point where old kamma ceases to affect the mind is found. Daily practice. As everyone who practices it soon realizes, this introspective cultivation has to move against the current of much of mainstream culture. We have a massive distraction industry that encourages us to take time to get away from where we're at, reading something, eating something, half watching TV, and this takes us away from reviewing or cultivating the mind. It also often puts us into situations in which we can have no responsible input. Distraction seems to offer an easy way out of stress, but it doesn't do us a lot of good. It's a way of ignoring negative effects that we don't want to or know how to deal with, but it doesn't fully remove them. For example, say your working day is stressful, and then you drive through the jangle and aggressive behavior of the traffic. All that random, rapid, and potentially risky contact agitates the nervous system. So you arrive home feeling frayed and stressed, and there's the reflex to contact something pleasant or easeful. Maybe you just flop down and eat something, drink something, or watch something on TV. You get vaguely relaxed or amused for a while, but the state of ease is superficial, induced, and dependent on props. In this scenario, the mind becomes weak and undeveloped, and gradually the forms of distraction need to become more powerful. If the pattern is allowed to persist, a lifetime can be spent becoming psychologically and emotionally weak. Most of us need reminders not to pick up the mood of the social context willy-nilly, and that we can come out of the program of the daily round. For start, I always have a Buddha image in my living space, on a small shrine, or somewhere where I can relate to it. It's something that reminds me of the value of being fully present. It encourages me to pause and acknowledge and respond to whatever state I'm in. It reminds me that the first priority is to clear some space in the mind, rather than even make cultivation another thing to be busy doing. If the day rotates around fixing things, getting things done, and being on the go, it's good to learn how to moderate volition by not fixing and not getting things done or sorted out. When you are in an emotionally rocky state, the most skillful response may simply be to receive what you are feeling at the present moment with some clarity and sympathy, to sit quietly and allow things to blow through. Whatever the state, the initial response has to be to stay present and cultivate spaciousness. But the way that cause and effect work is that even 5 minutes of not acting on or suppressing the present mind state results in some kind of ease or diminishment of pressure. Then we begin to recognize a natural sanity, a seed of awakening that's there when the doing stops. It's not far off, but we do need to get in touch with and encourage it. It's always possible. The most significant realization that comes from a 5 or 10 minute break from aspects of being and becoming is that things stop by themselves. This isn't to say that a few minutes of just chilling out is the end of Kamma and the dawning of ultimate truth. But it does show us that the mind can have a different direction from zigzagging forwards or backwards. The mind can open, and in that opening, the whole scenario changes. Mental awareness is experienced as a field within which thoughts, moods, and sensations come and go, and we can witness rather than act upon that mental content. Furthermore, a good amount of mental content just whirs to a halt when there isn't the view that one has to do or fix or even stop, and there isn't the buzzy, urgent self keeping it going. This, in a nutshell, is the description of how the Kamma of cultivation leads to the end of Kamma. But it's a subtle process to undertake. Thoughts and moods don't stop through trying to make them go away. That trying is more volition, more Kamma. They stop when the identification program the basis of becoming, is not switched on. This is worth remembering because when one considers the complexity of the feedback loops of cause and effect, it's easy to imagine that a very complex process of unwinding would be needed. But a glimpse at how ceasing happens, through not supporting the view and energy of identification, shows us that the way out of disease and stress is direct and simple. And that encourages us to step up occasions wherein we take non-identification into deeper levels of our psychological activity. This is through the ongoing process of meditation, but we all need to and can back that up in our daily life. We don't have to drink the water we're swimming through. To not drink in the ocean of samsara means checking and restraining the pull of the senses, checking and putting aside the programs of the mainstream, and cultivating full attention and awareness. In other words, it's a whole life path, the Noble Eightfold Path, and that proceeds from right view and right aim, not from views of self, fate, or through automatic systems and techniques. Through following it, you realize that you're not as embedded in samsara as it might seem. For a start, you never actually become anything for very long. Sure, you seem to go through periods of agitation and tension, but with practice, there are periods of joy and humor. And as you get more skilled in attending to the mind, the habit of holding on to particular states loosens up. You find yourself identifying with this or that state less and less, and that reduces the stress and turmoil. Seen like this, human life is a great opportunity. Regardless of the effects that we inherit, we can always act skillfully and cultivate the mind. We can always move towards goodness, happiness, and liberation.
Namayam Dhammakataya Sadhu Param Dadamase
Sadhu